This is the Undefeated podcast with your host, Keenan Tully. This is the place where we show that hearing loss is not going to be a barrier in your life. You can still chase all of your dreams no matter what. It hasn't stopped me. Don't let it stop you. Let's go. Hey guys, Keenan Tully here. Welcome back to another episode of the Undefeated podcast presented by Blue Moth Hearing. If you see, I'm wearing the Blue Moth racing hat. As you know, if you've seen on my socials, Blue Moth Hearing are partnering with Undefeated and myself on a full year of racing this year. So super looking forward to that. Today's guest is Brad Stewart. Now, really looking forward to this because I don't really get the chance to speak to many audiologists. And Brad used to own his own audiology clinic, and he's since left the practice, and he now coaches audiology clinics. So I'm really interested to see how things have changed over the years with audiology, and also what he predicts for the future of audiology. So it's going to be really interesting. I'm sure he's going to have many cool stories and insights into certain topics. So let's go ahead. This is Brad Stewart on the Undefeated podcast. Well, hey, Brad, thank you for joining me on the Undefeated podcast today. How have you been?
Doing well. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been excited about this one because I don't often get the chance to speak to many audiologists. Or you used to be an audiologist. You've since left the practice and you've started your own company. And we'll get onto that in a bit. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about hearing loss from your point of view and how you've seen it evolve over the last few years. So yeah, tell the audience a bit about you and what you do.
Yeah, thanks. So I am an audiologist. I was a private practice audiologist for about a decade. I had my own private practice for about 7 years, and then I sold that practice in 2021. Since then, I've been a practice management consultant for other audiologists who are running their own private practices. And I also work with Dr. Cliff Olson, who's in the world of YouTube. He's kind of the big YouTube audiologist, and he creates a lot of consumer facing content. So I work with him on content to educate consumers to be better informed about treating their own hearing loss, and with his network of audiologists who all follow best practice audiological care. So my thing now is kind of trying to encourage audiologists to provide really high quality patient care and educate consumers on how to find the best care for their needs.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very important. Yeah. So what motivated you to get into audiology in the first place? Because most audiologists that I've spoken to, they've had some interest in the health field, but maybe, being a doctor or a surgeon wasn't for them because of blood and stuff like that. So, so yeah, how did you kind of get started?
When I was, when we're young, when we're 18-year-olds trying to figure out what we want to do with our lives, none of us really know what we want to do. My mom was a special needs high school teacher. And so I was around kind of like that in the therapeutic kind of setting for a long time. And so speech therapy was something that I was kind of a little bit interested in, and thinking about working with people who had strokes and things like that. And so when I was touring University of North Texas and their speech and hearing department, I actually got a chance to tour the audiology department. And it just happened that I got to see an appointment via the video into the room of a guy who was probably in his 50s, like leather jacket, like biker, like Texas, like kind of rough and tumble dude. And they were fitting this guy with his first set of hearing aids. And they put the hearing aids on, and the guy just started crying.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, wow, like that was like very striking to me. Yeah. That my perception was that this audiologist just got to like, push a few buttons on a computer and kind of transform this guy's life. And so, in that moment, I was like, that's really cool. I want to learn more about that. And so I ended up going to school for audiology, and really actually falling in love with the business side of it and learning how to grow a business so that we can help more people. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting field, because we do really get to make pretty transformative change in people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, and hearing loss is one of them things that kind of sneaks up on people, and it's quite hard to actually realize that you have it until it gets really bad. Sometimes,
Mhm.
So yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, so um, before you started your own audiology practice, like, did you see any particular needs in the audiology field? Like, did you see were there parts missing or things that were being missed out that you thought I need to change that?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, a lot of what motivated me actually to start my practice was my first private practice experience.
Yep.
I'd gone to school for 7 years, which was faster than most. Most people take 8 years or more.
Wow.
But I'd gone to school for a long time wanting to help people with this condition. And I got into my first job, and, like, to put it nicely, it was essentially a sales job. Like, I was essentially selling hearing aids,
Hmm.
and we had revenue targets, and it was very, like, retail oriented, and patients who had spent $7,000 plus on hearing aids were coming back a year later for follow-up care, and they hadn't been wearing them and weren't satisfied. And I was just like, man, I didn't go to school for all of this time to, like, sell expensive hearing aids that people don't use. And so I felt inspired to go, and I knew that that wasn't the case everywhere. I hadn't had the experience yet of kind of understanding what the variables were that could actually create the results that people are coming to us for.
Hmm.
And so when I started my practice, really kind of like priority one was figuring out what is it that actually creates the results.
Yep.
And I found that, treating hearing loss is a lot more than just putting a set of hearing aids in a person's ears. Like, in a lot of cases, people have gone for years without hearing properly. So their ears and their brain don't talk to each other properly. And the auditory system is kind of atrophied. It's like a muscle that you haven't exercised in a long time. And so we've got to do, like, scientific testing to actually make sure the sound that's going into their ears is the appropriate amount. And then we've got to use some human psychology to understand that this is like behavior change that has to happen over time. And we've got to get people developing a new habit of putting hearing aids in their ears every single day to give their brain time to recalibrate and relearn how to hear the world properly. And so the thing that actually really allowed my practice to be as successful as it was is we developed a treatment program that was really a brain retraining program that allowed us to fit hearing aids at a comfortable level, hold people accountable, and kind of be their coach to make sure they're wearing them consistently, and gradually kind of stair step the amount of sound that they were hearing back up slowly over time so that their brain had time to adjust to it. And our patients, like, consistently had really, really good results when we went through that practice. And the takeaway for me was the hearing aids are important, but
Right.
it's a process, it's a rehabilitative process.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. What is a defining moment in your audiology career where uh, I know you obviously just briefly touched on the guy in the biker jacket, but is there anything else that, like, is really stuck with you where you're like, wow, like, I really changed that person's life?
Yeah, so for several years I also had a vestibular therapy practice, which that is like for people who are dizzy and have balance problems. And so we were a highly specialized clinic, had a big team of physical therapists alongside our audiologists, and we were the kind of the place where when doctors didn't know what to do with dizzy people, they sent them to us, and we were able to help them get better. And there was one guy who had this really challenging vertigo and dizziness for years, like over a decade. And he had gotten to the point where he was in his 50s and he had become really reclusive. Like, he wouldn't go outside because every time he went to the supermarket or to like his kid's football game or anything, he would get so dizzy, and he'd had a lot of embarrassing experiences, and he developed a lot of anxiety. and we helped him with his dizziness, and he got a lot better, and he really got back out into the world again. And after we got him through that process, part of what we would do is we would test their hearing, because a lot of times if you have balance and dizziness problems, you also have inner ear related hearing problems. And sure enough, this guy had a hearing loss, and he tried hearing aids like 5 years prior. And because of his anxiety, just that amount of sound it had like sent him over the edge, and he just couldn't handle it. But now his hearing loss, now that he had dealt with the dizziness, now the hearing loss was the next thing that was kind of causing him to become less social and more reclusive. And so I really had to spend a lot of time with this guy, like coaching him, like, dude, I'm going to be here with you. We're going to work through this process. Like, it's going to take time, but I'm not going to overwhelm you. Like, we'll take it slow. And it was challenging. And he tried to, like, he got hearing aids. We fit him. He tried to give him back several times because he was like getting the anxiety and stuff. And I just really had to coach him a lot. And by the end of a couple of months of working through this, and we finally got him in the habit of wearing them and got comfortable with them, again, he was just like, he was so grateful. He was crying. He was like, I don't think anybody else could have gotten me to the point where like I was actually able to get through this successfully. And it was just, I mean, it's just like really humbling to like see that you've actually changed somebody's life, you know?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. What are some of the like things that you did to kind of coach him throughout that entire process? Like, is it,
Yeah.
is it like constant follow ups, or is it more kind of like verbal support with them, just talking them through the whole process?
Yeah. A lot of it is interesting. Like working with especially more people who have more stuff going on, right? Like hearing
Right.
loss and tinnitus or hearing loss and dizziness. We kind of straddle the line between being audiologists and being like coaches
Right.
or counselors.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is just like helping them believe in themselves, that they have the resilience and they have the ability to do this thing. And I can't do it for them, but I can like be there to make sure that it's as painless as possible. But to some extent, just like any rehabilitative, like, you know, if you tear your rotator cuff and you go to the physical therapist, it's going to hurt, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you've got to go through that process of pain to get to the other side of living the life that you want to live. And so my job is just to kind of like help them get through that pain in the most comfortable way possible and coach them that they're actually able to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, to me that's like a really fun part. Like I'm a nerd and I like all the technology and the science and stuff, but like coaching people through that really challenging stuff is really rewarding. It's hard, but it's really rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it just shows that there's so much more to audiology than the technology inside the hearing aids. There's a bigger picture part to it. So
Yeah,
yeah, I'm
for
really
sure.
really glad you shared that story. How have you seen audiology evolve over the last years? Like, have has the way in which we test for hearing loss changed? Has it become more complex? And then also, how do you see it changing in the future, in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. The interesting thing about audiology is like a lot of the testing that we've done is the testing that we've done for decades now.
Right?
So a lot of it has actually stayed relatively stagnant. And
Is that a good
um,
thing or a bad thing? Do you think?
I mean, you know, I mean, there's certain components of it are just that, you know, we have had good testing protocols for a long time, and the nature of hearing loss hasn't changed. But then some of it too is just that audiologists in general haven't been willing to update their protocols. Like
Okay.
for example, like speech and noise testing isn't new, but maybe half of hearing providers do speech and noise testing. Speech and noise testing is measuring your brain's ability to hear in challenging, noisy situations, which, you know, somebody with hearing loss, like, you know, like that's where a lot of the pain comes from, is having a hard time hearing when it's noisy. Like you can do the one-on-one, but the background noise is the challenge. And so being able to understand how much difficulty that person's auditory system has understanding speech and background noise is really important for me to, like, one, set realistic expectations,
Hmm.
and two, make good recommendations as far as what they actually need from a technology standpoint. So yeah, that part hasn't changed a lot. The thing that's changed a lot from a technology standpoint is the hearing aids themselves. The actual technology is just getting better and better and better.
Right.
Uh, we've got now a lot smaller devices, a lot smarter devices. They're using, deep neural network processing, or they're using like artificial intelligence to process sound. And now they're going to have like Auracast, where you can walk into an airport or, in a movie theater and like kind of be connected everywhere you go with Bluetooth technology. So things are getting a lot better from a technology standpoint. And I actually think really with, and another big change a couple of years ago is that the United States federal government passed a law that allowed over-the-counter hearing aid sales.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of bigger manufacturers like Sony and Bose and big audio companies are kind of getting in the game, and more money is coming into it. And so, I think that where there's commercial interest, normally there's faster technology progression.
Mm-hmm.
And then just with AI, it's like as these kind of automated deep neural network machine learning systems get better, I can see a world where for somebody who has kind of a straightforward like noise induced hearing loss and they're fairly young and they're fairly tech savvy, could do a pretty good, you know, hearing test through the hearing aids and could self program and get a pretty good outcome.
Yep.
Um, you know, it's hard because like we talked about, the hearing aid isn't the whole solution, but I think that so few people wear hearing aids uh, then should be wearing hearing aids. Like it's somewhere around 25 to 30% of people who have a hearing loss wear hearing aids.
Mm-hmm.
That even if it wasn't a perfect solution, if we could get more people treating their hearing loss, we know there are a lot of positive side effects from a health standpoint to doing so.
Yep.
So yeah, so I think that it will improve from an accessibility standpoint. People are wearing stuff in their ears, so the stigma is kind of going away.
Yep.
So I think there's a lot of positive.
Yeah. That was actually going to be one of my questions when you just briefly touched on AI. Is do you see AI being implemented? Obviously, right now it is in some hearing aids, but do you see it being used in the actual testing for hearing loss as well? And how do you think that would actually look like as well?
Yeah, I mean, again, interestingly, automated audiology, which like audiometry specifically, like which is the beeps, like raise your hand if you hear the beep kind of thing. That's
Yep.
actually been around for a long time, where you can just put people in a booth and have them push the button, and the machine automatically kind of measures where their hearing loss is.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that a lot of that stuff doesn't require, in most cases, doesn't require a human operator. Now, again, like audiology is always kind of a weird field because we tend to be dealing with, in a lot of cases, older patients,
Mm-hmm.
um, patients with cognitive issues, or younger, like kids. And so there is some challenge there because, like, in a lot of cases, I have to use my discretion if somebody has a memory problem to know that they're just kind of pushing the button because they forgot what they were supposed to be doing, and to reprompt them. Or with a kid, like, did they just get distracted by like a picture on the wall and stop pushing the
Right.
button? Right. So like I do think there's nuance there that makes it a little bit harder to automate. So I think probably the early thing will be the actual like fitting of the hearing aids and the hearing aids ability to automatically make adjustments to the sound around them. I kind of think that's where the really high impact stuff is going to happen.
This podcast is brought to you by Blue Moth Hearing. Blue Moth Hearing are a telehealth audiology company, and they are the only place where you can get 3 of the top hearing tech directly to your door. They offer a truly revolutionary hearing aid experience box where you get to trial 3 of the best hearing tech in the world from the comfort of your own home before making the decision on which hearing aids are best for you. Go to bluemothhearing.com and use code unDEAFeated for $50 off your hearing aid experience box. What do you think is, because obviously you've been around patients most of your life now, what do you what have you picked up on is like one of the biggest drawbacks in people not taking that step to get themselves into a set of hearing aids. I mean, obviously, stigma is one part of it. I have my own story where I actually stopped wearing my hearing aids for 7 or 8 years because my teacher told me to take them out. So I built up a massive stigma around them. But
Well,
stigma can't be the only thing, right? There's got to be other things out there that's holding people back from making that jump. What have you noticed? Some of the other areas.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, when I talk to people who are considering treating their hearing loss, the kind of like intuitive answer is cost, because
Mm-hmm.
it is in a lot of cases not covered by insurance and can
Right.
be a pretty big out of pocket expense.
Yep.
I think the average in the United States is somewhere around 5,000 USD. So, you know, like that's the intuitive answer. But the interesting thing is, in countries like European countries where hearing aids are subsidized, the adoption rate is only like maybe 5% higher than it is in the United States.
Wow.
So it's not just money.
Right.
So, I think that stigma is still a big one. Like, I think that there is especially with age, both ways, right? Like, I think as people are like in their 50s and starting to need to treat their hearing loss, they're like kind of like the denial or the hit on the ego of like, I didn't think that I was really kind of aging, and you have to admit that your body isn't working as well as it used to. And if you're younger, kids get made fun of. There's like a lot of like bullying and self-consciousness around it. So I think that the stigma part is a big part. um, I think a lot of it is interesting because most people that have a vision difficulty just wear glasses or contacts, right? They don't just say, oh, I'm just going to live with it,
Yeah.
I'm just going to deal with it, right? But I guess the difference is, if you have an untreated hearing loss, like, it's annoying to you and everybody around you. If you have an untreated vision loss, like, you're like crashing your car, or like, like
Right.
running into things. So it's a
Yeah.
little it's a little bit more challenging to just kind of get away with.
Right.
Um, I wish I had a perfect answer for it, but I think it's kind of a confluence of a lot of things. But I do suspect that as consumer electronics get more in the game and people are just kind of wearing ear level stuff for multiple reasons, right? Like language translation and, like different like biofeed, like, I wear an Apple Watch to measure my heart rate, but maybe we have like an earbud that does the same thing. And I think as that becomes more acceptable,
Yeah.
just having, like augmented hearing integrated into those devices starts to become more kind of like a natural progression of things.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Um. Yeah. I feel like I've spoken to quite a few people, like probably older in age, like maybe in their 60s and 70s, and they're like, "Oh, my hearing's been bad for the last 20 years, 30 years. Why should I bother now?" What would your message be to those types of people that are kind of saying, "Well, you know, I've had I've had a hearing loss for the last 20 years, 30 years. I've been living with it. What's the point? Like, what are the other health benefits of
Yeah.
treating it and getting into a set of hearing aids?"
Yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of research in the past decade and a half on the impact on the brain. We know pretty conclusively at this point that if you have an untreated hearing loss, you're putting yourself at a higher risk of developing memory issues and cognition problems. And even like if it runs in your family and you have risk factors, even like Alzheimer's and dementia risk goes up pretty significantly. Um, the other thing with hearing loss is, like I talked about earlier, your brain's auditory center is like a muscle. And just like a muscle, if you don't exercise it, if you don't use it, you lose it. And the longer you go with an untreated hearing loss, the worse your hearing is going to get and the harder it becomes to treat. Like, I can't tell you how many patients were in their 80s and they've been stubborn their entire life, and now they're essentially like functionally deaf. They can't communicate with their friends and family anymore. And we try to fit them with hearing aids, and like the part of their brain that processes sound just doesn't really work very well anymore. So now it's just a bunch of loud noise. And
Right.
so these people have kind of lost the ability to bring their hearing back. And so I think people take for granted that, like, oh, I'll just get hearing aids when it gets bad enough. But the reality could be that you leave it untreated for too long and it becomes really hard actually to treat it because just your brain can't process the sound properly anymore.
Hmm.
And I don't want to be alarmist, but I do think that it's just like, it's one of those things where, especially as healthcare improves and we're living longer, being proactive about something like your hearing, which is your arguably your most important social sense, is going to be really important to your long-term quality of life and your ability to like interact with your friends and family and enjoy movies and music and just the stuff that goes on around you.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I do have a interesting question. So I grew up with a stutter, and obviously grew up with a hearing loss. Do you know if those two are linked in any way at all? Like, do you know if you know if maybe I have a stutter because of my hearing loss? I don't know how much you might know about that, but it's something I've always been interested in maybe finding out.
Yeah. So I'm definitely not, I haven't done any speech stuff since
Right.
undergrad. So
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, yeah.
very far from being an expert in that.
That's
I
fine.
will say that I'm not aware of an overlap there, but I do, and you're probably a lot more aware of like therapeutic stuff that's done for stuttering than I am. But I do know that things like auditory feedback training, where you kind of like hear an echo of your own voice after you speak,
Right.
can help kind of recalibrate your brain to manage the stutter. So it's,
Yeah.
there is some correlation between how you hear your own voice and your stutter, but
Hmm.
outside of that, not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, yeah. I was just curious because you mentioned that you studied a bit of it, so
Yeah.
I thought I'd ask. So tell me a bit about Aud Coach. Um, yeah, when did you start it? And also, what do you uh, anticipate in the future for it?
Yeah. So iCoach is my private practice consulting company. And I started that right after I sold my practice. Um, right now, when I started my audiology practice, I started by going out to senior living communities and providing house call services. And so I help people start up new practices using that model. And then, I mentioned Dr. Cliff. I'm working with his network and actually flying out to Phoenix in about a month to help him put together some training for uh, hearing providers that follow best practices to help them improve their practice so they can help more patients and ideally attract more patients into providers that are providing really high quality care. For me, that's really kind of the most important thing. Is I think that a lot, like we were talking about, why don't people adopt hearing treatment? I think a lot of it actually is because so many people have negative experiences with hearing treatment. I think a lot of people have a negative perception of hearing aids and that they don't work. And a lot of that comes from some person who's not following high quality care, selling them a $7,000 set of hearing aids and then not following through on the care. So I really want to support providers who are doing the right thing by their patients, getting really good results for their patients, and raise awareness for that and get more people into that, because hearing treatment for most people should be very effective. And I want to support practices that are reinforcing that narrative because I think it's important so that more people treat their hearing.
Hmm. Yeah. Is there anything that sticks out in the practices that you go to that like they might be missing out on, or something they could do better? Do you feel like is there like
Yeah.
one kind of overriding thing that is kind of missed out?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like most audiologists are they're helpers. Like they're people that want to help people. That's what draws people into this field. And the challenge is we're in a capitalist healthcare system where in most cases you are having to ask people for money in exchange for treatment. And so these really big-hearted people that provide really high quality care have a really hard time asking somebody to pay for the care and promoting themselves. And so people end up going to a big chain who most of the time doesn't do a very good job, but they spend a lot of money marketing and they do really good sales training so that they do a really good job of converting patients into hearing aids.
Hmm.
I would rather these practices that have really good, big hearted people that follow best practices and take care of their patients. I would rather those people get good at the quote unquote sales part of the process, because that's the part that allows them to help their patients. And so, like, to me, it's weird because I never like to me, there's a bit of a stigma of training sales around hearing aids,
Right.
because it sounds like potentially taking advantage of people who have a hearing loss and looking at people with a hearing loss as dollar signs. And for me, it's really the opposite. For me, it's really empowering people who are doing a really good job with their patients to have communication skills, to ethically and transparently guide patients and empower their patients and coach their patients to the treatment that they need and the treatment that they came to them for. But that's the weakest link, honestly. Like, in most practices, it's fewer than 50% of good, high quality candidates for treatment end up moving forward with treatment.
Mm-hmm.
So that means, over half of people who need their help are walking out without help. And for me, that's a big problem. So there are things we can do ethically to help these people still feel good about their work that they're doing and still feel like they're not being salespeople and not being salesy, but to be more effective at getting people to commit to treating their hearing loss.
Right. Yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah. Love that. Yeah, this has been awesome. You've really opened my eyes up to more about the audiology industry. I guess finally, this is a question I like to ask all of my guests: is to the kids and teenagers growing up today with a hearing loss who feel like they can't, feel like their hearing loss is holding them back in some capacity, feel like they can't chase their dreams. What would you like to say to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that probably I don't have a hearing loss. I have normal hearing, and I think that probably the most challenging thing is being your own advocate and having the confidence to stand up for yourself and to get the support that you need so that you can kind of meet your full potential. You're still like a whole person. There are plenty of people that have a vision loss or people that have other challenges that go through life and are very successful. And so I think really it's just a matter of getting the support that you need to compensate for the hearing loss so that you can live, the life that you have the potential to live.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Love that. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Brad. It's been a pleasure to speak to you.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. I'll see you. Bye bye.
All right. Bye.